Imagine living in a world where a single mistake could mean starvation for your entire family. In the modern era, an unexpected pregnancy is a life-changing event that comes with many safe medical options. But step back 10,000 years into the brutal landscape of the ancient world. There were no clinics, no sterile tools, and certainly no safety nets. An unwanted pregnancy was not a moral debate or a political issue. It was a terrifying calculation of life and death. For nomadic tribes constantly on the move, a woman could only carry one infant at a time. If a new baby arrived while the previous one was still nursing, neither would survive the harsh winters. The tribe's food supply was entirely dependent on what they could hunt or gather that day. A pregnant woman was slower, more vulnerable to predators, and required more calories. So what did our ancestors do when nature forced their hand? They didn't just accept their fate and wait for disaster to strike. Instead, they relied on a deep, dangerous knowledge of the natural world. Ancient women were the first true botanists and pharmacists. They learned through centuries of trial and error which plants could heal and which could kill. More importantly, they discovered which roots and leaves could stop a pregnancy before it truly began. One of the most famous examples comes from the shores of the ancient Mediterranean. There grew a legendary plant known as Silphium. Silphium was a giant fennel-like weed with thick roots and yellow flowers. Ancient texts describe it as a miracle cure for dozens of ailments. But its most prized function was as a highly effective, reliable oral contraceptive and abortifacient. It was so essential to the ancient economy that the city of Cyrene built its entire wealth upon it. They even stamped the image of the Silphium seed pod on their silver coins. Interestingly, that seed pod was shaped exactly like the modern symbol of a heart. Women across the ancient world paid fortunes for a single dose of its sap. They would drink it mixed with water or wine to ensure their periods returned. But human desperation comes with a heavy price. The demand for Silphium was so massive that it could not be cultivated, only harvested from the wild. Within a few centuries, the ancient world had consumed the entire species. Pliny the Elder wrote that the last known stock of Silphium was presented to Emperor Nero as a curiosity. They literally ate the plant into extinction just to control their reproduction. But what happened to the women who lived far away from the Mediterranean coast? They had to turn to much darker and more dangerous alternatives in their local forests. One such alternative was a highly toxic herb known as pennyroyal. Pennyroyal is a member of the mint family, with a pleasant, deceivingly sweet aroma. Ancient physicians like Dioscorides documented its powerful ability to induce uterine contractions. Women would brew the leaves into a thick, bitter tea. But this botanical solution was a terrifying gamble with the reaper. The active chemical in pennyroyal is a deadly toxin that destroys the liver. If a woman brewed the tea too weak, the pregnancy would continue. If she brewed it even slightly too strong, she would suffer massive organ failure and die in agony. Despite the horrific risks, thousands of women took the cup to their lips. It proves just how desperate they were to avoid bringing another mouth into a starving world. Other tribes used different poisonous plants, like the notorious Queen Anne's lace. The seeds of this wild carrot were crushed and swallowed to block conception. Modern science has actually confirmed that these seeds contain chemical compounds that disrupt pregnancy. Our ancestors didn't have microscopes, but their empirical science was brutally accurate. In ancient China and Egypt, women ingested concoctions made from heavy metals. They drank terrifying mixtures containing liquid mercury, arsenic, and lead. These toxic potions ravaged the mother's body, intentionally poisoning her just enough to force a miscarriage. Their teeth would fall out, their hair would shed, and their minds would deteriorate. All of this suffering was endured simply to retain control over their own bodies. Beyond chemical warfare against their own wombs, they also used extreme physical trauma. Historical records describe women engaging in deliberate, agonizing physical labor. They would carry massive stones or jump repeatedly from high walls until they collapsed. Some ancient medical texts even recommended violently compressing the abdomen. Midwives would bind the stomach tightly with thick leather straps. They would knead and pummel the belly to disrupt the fragile life growing inside. In the steam-filled bathhouses of the Roman Empire, women subjected themselves to scalding heat. They would sit in tubs of nearly boiling water, hoping the extreme temperature shock would trigger a release. But what happened when the herbs failed? The poisons didn't work, and the child was born anyway. This brings us to the most heartbreaking and misunderstood survival tactic of the ancient world. When an unwanted child took its first breath, many ancient societies practiced exposure. Exposure simply meant taking the newborn and leaving it out in the wilderness. To our modern sensibilities, this sounds like cold-blooded murder. We picture monstrous parents abandoning their flesh and blood without a second thought. But the reality was far more tragic and complex. In places like ancient Greece and Rome, the father had absolute power over the family. If a child was born deformed, illegitimate, or simply during a famine, the father would reject it. They would carry the infant to a designated hillside or forest clearing. The baby was placed on the ground, often with a small token or amulet around its neck. By leaving the child to the elements, they believed they were placing its fate in the hands of the gods. If the gods wanted the child to live, someone would come along and save it. If not, nature would simply reclaim what it had made. This psychological loophole allowed parents to survive the immense guilt of what they had done. They didn't kill the child directly, the winter frost or the wild wolves did. In some cultures, exposing infants was actually mandated by law to preserve the strength of the tribe. A weak or extra child was viewed as a parasite that could pull the whole community down. In ancient Sparta, state elders inspected every newborn child for flaws. If they deemed the baby unfit for their warrior society, it was thrown into a deep chasm. The ancient world was not a place for sentimentality, it was an arena of pure survival. Mothers wept in the dark, carrying the invisible scars of the choices they were forced to make. They watched the hillsides at night, listening to cries that slowly faded into silence. These desperate measures were the foundation upon which human civilization managed to scrape by. Without these ruthless methods of population control, humanity might have starved itself into extinction. We look back at these practices and shudder with disgust from the comfort of our warm homes. We judge them through the lens of modern morality and abundant food supplies. But you cannot judge a starving person for doing whatever it takes to survive the winter. Every drop of toxic tea, every extinct medicinal plant, every abandoned child tells a story. It is a story of a species fighting desperately against a merciless natural world. Our ancestors bore incredible pain so that their remaining children might live to see another sunrise. They paid the ultimate psychological price to keep the flame of humanity burning. The history of human reproduction is not a fairy tale of natural miracles. It is a brutal, bloody war fought in the shadows of caves in ancient cities. And it is a testament to the terrifying strength of the human will to survive at any cost. We are the descendants of those who made the hardest choices, and that is a truth we can never erase.